meeting.
This is the awkward silence part of it. Oh, gosh. So Tom, Tom is seeing it.
Yeah, I'm seeing it now too. We're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, welcome everybody. I'd like to call this budget meeting to order. We'll start with the land acknowledgement. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki and the district of Spagnetti, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. East Hants further acknowledges the 50 African Nova Scotian communities whose 400-year history have contributed to the province's culture, history, and legacies. We are all treaty people. Okay, we are going to start with our first. We'll be looking for the approval or amendments to the agenda. Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, our first presentation is with PVSC and Paul Beasley, and if you wouldn't mind introducing your team, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Your Worship, Council. Pleasure to be here tonight, Madam CAO and staff. Once again, thank you for inviting us here for another year. First of all, we've shortened the presentation a little bit this year, but you'll notice that there is an appendix, so if there's anything in that appendix that you want to ask any questions on or whatever, feel free to do so. And while we've shortened the presentation, we've lengthened our bench this year. So we have with us here tonight, we have our VP of Stakeholders Relations, Rebecca Voistermans. We have our Director of Evaluation Standards, Jeff Cadell, over here. And we've got our Assistant Director of Operations, Dion Regular. And I think most of you know me, but for the new counselors here, which I think there's two new counselors, I'm Paul Beasley. I'm the Manager of Municipal Relations, and a little bit of and I know I've met some of you at NSFM, but I guess the unique sort of flair that I bring to the municipal relations management position is that I was a municipal councillor for 4 years, and I was a mayor town of Windsor for 8 years. So I know sort of what you deal with on a regular basis and the shoes that you walk in. So once again, thank you for having us here tonight, and we'll get started. So you may recognize this diagram. It's essentially just a high-level schematic of how the Nova Scotia property assessment and taxation system works. It's on all of the property assessments that we sent out this year, all 650,000 of them. So essentially it starts with the legislation, the Nova Scotia Assessment Act, which has been around for a long time, and also the PVSC, or the Property Valuation Services Act, which has been here since the early 2000s. That's when PVSC was sort of rolled out of the province, out of the government, and now we're an independent not-for-profit corporation. So we use, or we are mandated by the legislation to value all the properties within Nova Scotia. Like I say, there's like 650,000 properties this year. And we share that information on the assessments with the municipalities, all 49 of the municipalities. Then in sort of circle number 3 there, the municipalities take that information, they determine your budget requirements, which I understand you're kind of getting into that process tonight. And then you set your tax rates and send out your billings. And of course, last but not least, the property owners, of course, get those notices and billings and pay their property taxes. So as I mentioned, we were created under the Property Valuation Services Corporation Act, mandated by the Nova Scotia Assessment Act. We're municipally funded by all 49 municipalities. We have a board of directors. Essentially, it's 1/3 municipal elected officials, experienced or past municipal staff or current municipal staff, and essentially 1/3 of private, independent, outside professionals. And we also have Juanita from the NSFM as on the board as well. And we have approximately 130 employees, and they live and work in 62 communities around the province and cover the entire province as far as assessment services. So what we do and what we don't do, you'll remember this slide from last year probably, those of you that were here. As I mentioned, we deliver the roll to all the municipalities and 650,000 assessment notices which went out about 2 weeks ago. And we administer the capped assessment program as well as the seasonal tourist business designation program. The other thing that's not on here that we do is we do our very best to update the ownership of mobile and manufactured homes around the province, and essentially a lot of those mobile homes and manufactured homes aren't on property that is owned by the mobile or manufactured home owner. So it's kind of like a chattel or personal property. When they transact, we sometimes we know, sometimes we don't, but we try our very best to keep the ownership up to date on those manufactured homes around the province as well. We do not have the authority to set the tax rates, collect the taxes, create tax policy, or provide tax relief. That's mandated under the Municipal Government Act, and that's under the purview of the municipality and council, of course. We don't determine land ownership. That's the land registry does that. And as far as land boundaries and acreages and the actual particulars of the land, that's the land registry as well. They provide that information to us. So PIDs, AANs, land, the specifics of land, that's the land registry. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Cadell, and he's going to walk you through a little bit about the Assessment Act.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And yes, so I'll talk a little bit about our assessment activities that we conduct and some of the market, the market situation that led to the 2025 assessment roll. So our assessment activities are guided by provincial legislation, as Paul mentioned, and also industry standards. The Nova Scotia Assessment Act requires that we assess all property at its market value, and we do that annually. The 2025 assessment values that property owners will see on their assessment notices is a reflection of market value as of January 1st, 2024. And that value also reflects the state of the property at December 1st of 2024. So if property owners have made changes to the property during 2024, we would have inspected those properties, and whatever the state of that property is on December 1st, that's reflected. So for example, if a property is 50% complete, a building is 50% complete, then it's being assessed at 50% on the 2025 roll. Another specific part of provincial legislation that we administer on behalf of the province is the capped assessment program. The capped assessment program has been in place since 2005, and it places a cap on the amount of the taxable assessment, a cap on the amount that the taxable assessment can increase in any 1 year. It's based on the Nova Scotia Consumer Price Index as it stands each October. And for 2025, the CPI was 1.5%. You may recall that in previous years, it was 3.2% last year and 7.7% in 2003. I mentioned that the 2025 assessment values are a reflection of market value as of January 1st, 2024. To arrive at those values, we've studied sales that have occurred during 2023. So just to bring us back to what was happening in the marketplace back in 2023, we've provided some headlines as a reminder to so we can remember what was happening back in 2023. But it really came down to low supply of properties on the market, high demand, which really led to an increased upward pressure on sales prices. And when we look at other sectors of the market as well, we think of office vacancy as being high, and apartment vacancy being low. So the sales prices that we study and we analyze from 2023, when we think of those situations in the market as well, those are certainly factors factors that contribute to the sales prices that we studied. So those market conditions led to a total assessed value in East Hants of $4.5 billion, which was a 12.5% increase over 2024. And that breaks down to $4.2 billion of residential assessment, which is allocated across 16,000 accounts, and $359 million in commercial assessment, which is allocated across 777 accounts. And with the cap, the residential value is approximately $3 billion. And that is a result of approximately 11,000 accounts being eligible for the cap program in 2025. Over the course of the year, we complete a number of activities that support our valuation process. We processed approximately 400 appeals, and those were appeals with respect to the 2024 assessment roll. We processed and inspected 448 properties in East Hants as a result of building permits that would have been issued by the municipality. And we reviewed and analyzed 823 property transactions, which are the foundation of our mass appraisal process. The 2025 assessment roll resulted in 11,499 dwelling units, and that was an increase of 290 over the 2024 roll. So I'd like just to break down the values a little bit for the 2025 roll in East Hants. Residential value was up 12.97% over the previous year. And again, when we factor in cap to that, we're looking at an increase of 8.9.7%. That's the residential taxable increase over the previous year. Just scanning down the exempt properties, we see a slight, those values are fairly stable or a slight decrease. The exempt residential properties would be such things, would be probably large properties. For example, the municipal building would be an exempt property or properties owned by the municipality. Quite often, those are properties that don't transact often, so we defer to a cost approach on those values. Costing for 2025, we saw a decrease as opposed to a significant increase in recent previous years. So that's partly the reason for we're seeing a decrease in those values. Going to turn it over to Dion. Dion's going to talk about the commercial values on the roll for East Hants for 2025.
Good evening, Council. Thanks for having me. I'll speak to the commercial aspect of this presentation. I've been with PVSC for nearly 2 decades, strictly on commercial for the last 10 years. So it looks like for East Hants outlook for this year, the filed roll, the all commercial assessed values looking at an increase of about 7.6%. You look to the column there. Filed roll 2024 is about $333.9 million, increasing to $359.3 million moving into 2025. The commercial taxable assessed value is up approximately 14%, moving from $199.8 million to about $228.3 million. And again, the commercial exempt value is, as Jeff was speaking about, the municipally owned, federally owned properties that are within your district. And those are a decrease of about 2.3% overall, which is attributed to what Jeff was speaking about, the costing mechanisms that PVSC use for these properties year after year. And so that's the commercial summary and total valuation. I'll hand it back over to Jeff here. He's going to speak to some residential trends and valuation for East Hants area.
Thank you, Dion. Yeah, so just when we look at the residential roll and when we study some of the major influences to the value across properties, not only in East Hants, but we've seen very similar trends across other areas of the province as well. So when we think about the residential roll and the change in value for 2025, certainly homes that have been renovated, we see those properties changing in value at a higher rate than properties that have not been renovated. So certainly the next box we think about homes built in 1990 and prior. Those are the homes that are getting to the age where renovation is common. So that age grouping and those specific properties that renovated, we're seeing a stronger market growth in areas. Mobile homes in parks and mobile homes on land, we've seen a strong market growth in those properties, perhaps because of the more moderate average prices we're seeing in those properties. But certainly we're seeing strong, across the province, strong market growth in those types of properties. And certainly anywhere in Nova Scotia, any water-influenced type properties, whether it be oceanfront, ocean view, lakefront, or so on, have always provided a strong market growth area as well. Land values, we're seeing land in demand in many areas across the province as well. So land values we're seeing a strong market growth in those areas. And for some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, with the low supply in residential single-family homes and so on, but apartments, because of the strong investment environment for apartments, we're seeing strong investment in apartments. We're seeing construction of apartments and remodeling as well. So that sector of the residential file is showing some strong market growth. And Dion will move into some trends that we're seeing on the commercial file.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, speaking of the apartment sector, it is residentially classed, but it is handled under the commercial file. In terms of your district is not immune to apartment growth that we've seen out here in the last couple of years. Here's some commercial trends that we've seen the past year with respect to the deceleration of construction costs through 2023, which attributed to what we just spoke about in terms of some of the decreasing values across the commercial properties. Stabilizing interest rates and improved sentiment, commercial investment. As you see, even yesterday, the Bank of Canada dropped the interest rates for our country, which will probably, really improve the outlook for, investing in commercial properties. As you know, to borrow money to invest in large properties, it takes lots of capital. So that would probably help that sentiment. Industrial parks continue to see strong market growth, as we see here in this district as well. An expansion of your industrial properties here, which is great to see. It's similar to HRM and across the province as well. As you guys have seen, I'm sure Burnside is expanding, as well as the backside of Bayers Lake as well. The retail sector saw a steady tendency and increased leases. Since the pandemic, where it seemed to be, a very volatile market for retail properties, it seems that as of late, since we've came out of the pandemic, that the retail sector seems to be growing again, especially in terms of PVSC examines a lot of rental information for income property owners that send in their information. So we examine lease renewals and that sort of thing to understand what's happening with the market in the retail sector. Accommodation and hospitality sectors recovered and returned since the pre-COVID market. A lot of the, and this isn't limited to the East Hants area, maybe in the future, I could see expansion out here with accommodation properties since we are so handy to HRM, but nonetheless, the accommodation and hospitality sector across the province has really bumped up since we've came out of the pandemic in the last couple of years. And the office sector overall across the province has remained relatively stable, especially within HRM. There's not a lot of what I call standalone office property buildings here in East Hants, but yet to be seen with the expansion of your industrial parks here. But nonetheless, moving on to the next slide here, we'll move into the appeal process, which is important to your constituents within your district here. Much we were talking about how everybody receives a property notice here, assessment notice. Most recently, if they haven't already, each property owner received their assessment notice, which indicates an estimate of market value as of a certain base date, which for the 2025 assessment year would be January the 1st, 2024. Now, should a property owner be unsatisfied or disagree with that value that was on their notice, they have the opportunity to appeal that assessment value. And basically, it's all on the assessment form. You can fill it out and send it in, which explains, here are the reasons why I'm appealing this value that was placed on our property. The assessment appeals must be received by February the 13th, 2025, which is upcoming in the next couple of weeks. And the detailed instructions on how to file an appeal are included on the assessment notice as well. And additionally, on pvsc.ca is a plethora of information with respect to information about property owners, properties owned by constituents. 3 levels of appeal that are available to property owners. The initial assessor review, so once an individual or property owner files an assessment appeal, it will get reviewed by one of the valuation specialists in the company in terms of whether or not it's a commercial property or a residential property. And the outcome of that review, whether or not the value is confirmed or if it is amended, the second level of appeal is for the individual who disagrees with the outcome or they remain unsatisfied. They may appeal it to the Nova Scotia Assessment Appeal Tribunal, which is more of a formal process with an independent arbitrator from the province who sits down at a boardroom and listens to both sides of the story. And once the outcome of the Assessment Appeal Tribunal is reached, then the property owner will be informed. And if at that time they remain unsatisfied, then they can continue the appeal to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, which is the highest level of appeal court, which is a more formalized process. And so that's basically the appeal process. And here is the contact information for PVSC. It's important for your constituents to know right now that PVSC has all staff available on phones right now at the 1-800 number. If anybody receives their property assessment notice, we encourage all property owners who have questions to review your property assessment notice, and please reach out and have a conversation with one of the available assessors who can discuss the details of your property with you. And that pretty well concludes the presentation, and I will hand it back over to Rebecca.
Well, thank you,
Paul, sorry.
Madam Chair. We're open to any questions if councilors or yourself have any, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. There we
Our
go.
system is not working, Tom. Now it is.
Okay. First up to speak is Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you for the presentation and for reading. I have 3. The first one is fire department assessments. How were they assessed? The second one is buildings under construction. Are they, do they get assessed during construction or when they're finally finished? And the last one, just out of curiosity, on your appeals, do most, I'm just looking for percentage of the appeals for whether capped properties or uncapped properties, that's all. Okay?
Yeah, I think we were chatting about the fire departments earlier, and I think
Yes.
Mr. Cadell, we'll get Jeff to answer that one.
Okay.
And then Dion will speak about construction and process construction.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So the Assessment Act guides us in terms of what's assessable and what's taxable and what's exempt. So the Assessment Act, Section 5 of the Act describes for us which types of properties are exempt from taxation. Fire departments are one of those. So fire department buildings would, if used for fire department purposes, are exempt from taxation. And most likely that style of building, that structure would be valued through a cost approach, right? So we have 3 methods or 3 approaches to value available to us when we're valuing properties, just like any appraisal, any appraiser would as well. We can use the sales approach to value, which is the preferred approach for residential properties. We can use the income approach, which income producing properties, apartments and office buildings and so on, or the cost approach is an approach that we can use for those types of structures or properties that don't transact very often, or they're unique, they're very custom. There's not a lot of comparables in the market for those types of properties. So most likely a fire department building would be valued through the cost approach.
And we do have a slide on those 3 approaches, as you can see in your package, in your appendix.
If there's renovations to the fire department, are they reassessed?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe Dion would take that. I know Dion probably has followed up on building permits and so on cost of properties like that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're looking at a fire department, obviously commercial property, you're going to look at the land value, and then the building value is going to be atop of that, right? So you're going to have a cost per square foot on the materials, and the size basically is where the output's going to come from for a fire hall, right? And so yes, if an older age hall is renovated, then what will be recaptured is the depreciation on the building, right? So it will shift from being maybe an 80-year-old fire hall to maybe more of a 10-year-old fire hall once it's completely revamped, right? But yet again, as Jeff spoke to, it would be considered tax exempt,
Okay.
municipally owned, right?
Buildings under construction,
Certainly, yeah. So PBSC does assess buildings under construction. So what happens there, for instance, if somebody is constructing a property, whether it be commercial or residential, I like to refer to it as an interim value to capture some of that value that's in place. So, for instance, if somebody has a foundation in place, let's talk residential for a second, but it's similar, it's identical in commercial as well. If you have a foundation in place and maybe some framing, maybe electrical, plumbing, that sort of thing is in place, then there's added value to that property that should basically be reflected. Because if you think about it in terms of if there's raw property as a site cleared with maybe a well and septic on it, but none of the work that's been done, then there's more value added to that property, right? So PBSC does capture, based on the guidelines that we have in place, interim values on properties, right? And for commercial properties, we have what's called a mail out in terms of for larger commercial properties, in terms of if you're having multi-million-dollar, warehouses, what have you, being built, office buildings, we will send out a mail out in terms of a request for information to find out, cost to date on how much money was spent thus far in the project, right?
okay? And the last one, just for my curiosity about the appeal process, is your percentage, do you have a percentage of cap properties versus non-cap properties that appeal?
I'll try that one. I don't have those numbers, and I'm not sure that anybody at the table would have those specific numbers, but I would say that cap specifically may not be an issue for appeal that often. We get a lot of questions on cap and how it works. We get a lot of, when the cap was going up 7.7% in the sort of in the middle of COVID, we got a lot of questions about why did my assessment go up so much and why did my cap go up so much. Once explained, certainly people understood sort of how it works and how the cap works and that type of thing. I don't have a specific number. It might be a little difficult to get, but we do get a lot of questions about it.
On the
Okay.
cap?
I might just jump in there as well. So in terms of appealing, you can't appeal the capped amount. The appeal is for the market value, the assessed value. So if you are a capped property and your market value is $100,000 less than your capped assessment, you have to prove why your property should be worth less than $100,000 in order to see a taxable benefit, because you have to bring it lower than the capped amount.
Okay.
And the area where they may appeal their cap would be is if they lost the cap cap eligibility for whatever reason. They may appeal it to say, I don't believe I should have lost the eligibility. We can look at that. So that's kind of why, we get a lot of questions on it, but not a whole lot of appeals are specific to that.
Okay. Thank you for your answers. I'm much more knowledgeable now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next to speak is Deputy Warden McPhee.
Oh, thank you. I have a question that kind of think I know the answer to. But anyway, lady, and this was all online, so I didn't get to see her assessment. She said her assessment went up 73% since last year. She had done no renovations, no changes to her property. Would there be any circumstance under which a property assessment could go up that amount?
I think I'll let these two gentlemen speak to that. I'll let them by you.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly that's a unique property, and I don't have the information on that. But the values for property will change for a number of reasons. One would be physical changes. You've mentioned perhaps there was no physical changes. But certainly, on a yearly basis, we study the sales in that area, similar type properties that have sold, in this case during 2023. And we've looked to see what and we use, in this type of property, most likely valued on the sales approach to value. So we study those sales and we understand the attributes of those properties that have sold and the sales prices, and we draw a correlation between the attributes and the sales prices. And through mass appraisal, that's what allows us to value other similar type properties. So certainly, there's going to be different values among properties on a street or in a neighborhood. And there may even be different changes in value from one property to the other as a year-over-year value change, all specific to the types of properties that have sold, the market, what those properties are selling for. And as we draw a correlation between those attributes and sales prices, we'll value those similar properties at a similar rate. Certainly, if there's questions on a property like that, we would encourage the property owner to give us a call, and an assessor would review the information with the owner on the phone and review the market in their own area, and perhaps we could understand things a bit better.
Yes, and that's what I said you should call, and
Yeah.
if you indeed had that kind of an increase. Now, would that affect her cap rate or cap assessment?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the cap, the cap value is a calculation essentially based on the previous year value and the CPI. So CPI is 1.5%.
Right.
So if there's been no physical changes made to our property records for that property, then the taxable assessment for that account would most likely, I couldn't confirm without looking on it, looking at it, but would most likely increase by that 1.5%, and that's the taxable.
And that's what she's going to get taxed on. That's
Yeah.
what I said. If it did, it still wouldn't affect your cap to
Yeah,
that
correct.
extent. Okay, great.
And your colleague may like to weigh in on that as well.
Sorry, I also, just to build off of what Jeff said, there's the market value and analyzing the sales. There's also just ongoing review of property data. And so there's 650,000 properties in the province. We can't always access some of those properties. So throughout the year, whether it's through a drive-by or we use aerial pictometry that we fly across the province, we can pick up things that have made changes that have occurred on a property over the years that maybe there wasn't a building permit for. So in those cases, even if something wasn't updated currently or within the last year, if it was updated 5 years ago, and we weren't able to capture that, if we do see it, we do have to update our property data, and that can also have an impact on the assessed value.
And I wondered that with her, if maybe something that she'd made improvements 4 years ago that
Right.
just got caught
It
now. I
happens.
was
Yep.
wondering, yeah. And, yeah. Now, would building permits be one of the main ways that you would capture that there's been an improvement?
Absolutely. So, we work very closely with municipalities to share that building permit information, and our annual cycle,
Although we receive building permits throughout the year, because we have that state date, which is December 1st, we want to capture as close to that state date as possible the condition of the property, so that you may have a foundation in February, but you may have a full house in November. So we want to make sure we capture the full house. So usually between July all the way to the end of November, our staff are reviewing building permits, doing property inspections. They're out on the road, capturing the most up-to-date information we can on those building permits to capture that new growth for your assessment roll.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two quick questions. In a residential area, you have the average homes are worth, say, $250,000. Someone builds a home that's worth a lot more money, like say $500,000 or something like that. Does that affect the other residents, the value of the other homes?
It does, not necessarily. So we gather information on all the properties, all the unique attributes for the properties in that neighborhood. And of course, what we want to do, we want to study sales in that neighborhood and to understand how how property values are changing in that neighborhood and what certain types of properties are selling for on the market. So Different properties will have different market values, so if one property is much larger than the other, if we would expect, based on sales data that we study, that property would have a different market value than other properties. So I would indicate, I would probably suggest that similar properties would have a similar market value, and properties that are different, we'd be able to value those types of properties.
Thank you. The second question, I guess the deputy warden asked it. The only other question I have would be, do swimming pools like that in the backyard affect the value of properties?
So again, we turn to the Assessment Act to guide us on these sorts of things, and what's accessible and what's not. An in-ground swimming pool is accessible, but those above ground are not. So, but on the decking, for example, that around an above ground pool would be accessible, but the pool wouldn't. But so in-ground accessible, above ground not.
Thank you.
Next to speak is Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry if we're a bit late. I have one question, please. Is there any cap on land?
Does the cap program would apply to land as well, to vacant land, if all other eligibility requirements are met?
Like what you mean, other requirement, like?
So there's eligibility requirements for the cap program. It needs to be, certain, it's outlined on the Assessment Act. I want to make sure I don't miss any, but certainly the property has to be owned by a Nova Scotia resident who lives in the province at least 6 months of the year. It has to remain in the family, so if the property is sold to a non-family member, it would come out of the cap program for that first year, but otherwise, it would be eligible, yes.
So if it's in a company name?
No, it would not be. It has to be in an individual's name. Has to be owned by an individual.
Commercial properties are not capped.
Like if it's in a company, if it's a residential lot owned by a company limited, it's not capped?
That would be ineligible, correct, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Next to speak is Madam Warden.
Thank you. Just a question, and I probably have asked it before and don't remember the answer, so I'm going to ask it again. And I understand that assessments are traditionally or mostly based on market value. But so many times we will see homes change hands that sell for $100,000, $200,000 above the assessed value. But after the home is sold, the assessed value doesn't go up to the sale price. So I struggle to understand that.
Yeah, so I'll start by addressing that question with, certainly, and Rebecca talked about how we gather information on properties and keep our records up to date. Certainly, building permits are a big factor in that. We follow up on building permits. Sales are another great opportunity for us to gather information as well. So, but we have to keep in mind that we analyze sales. So, for example, for our 2025 assessment roll, we're analyzing sales that took place in 2023, right? So, when we do analyze that sale for the 2025, or if it's occurring in 2024, that sale is not relevant until our 2026 assessment. So we will review we review all sales from a couple different perspectives. We want to make sure that the sale is reflective of market value, that it's an open market arm's length transaction. Otherwise, it may not be useful for our analysis. But we also want to ensure we have the data accurate on that property as of the date of sale, because that's coming into our analysis to help us value other properties as well. But to your last point on the assessment doesn't always match the sale price, we have a process called mass appraisal that we use. So as Rebecca pointed out, we value 650,000 properties across the province each year, and there's a lot of individual sales within market areas. So we think of every sale as an individual sale. However, we want to establish a market value that represents what the typical market value is for different types of properties within a market area. So we study all those individual sales to help us determine that. We need to keep in mind that when we do make an adjustment, we're not only making an adjustment to an individual property. So if we adjust the land rate, for example, or we adjust a factor in a residential neighborhood, we're not affecting just one property, we're affecting all in that neighborhood with those adjustments we're making. So yes, we want to make sure we have the physical attributes correct on the property, but when we make our adjustments, we want to make sure that we're reacting to a market trend or pattern that we're seeing in that market area, so we can adjust all properties at a similar rate, or make sure all the similar types of properties are reflecting market. So individual sales are one thing, but we want to make sure we're studying all those sales that occurred within the Bay State, within that market, so we can make good decisions based on a solid market trend or pattern to all the properties in that neighborhood.
So, to me, that is saying that the assessed value of a home is not necessarily the true market value of that home. It's reflective of a trend of market values in the area of that home. But for me to tell someone, yes, that's the market value of your home, that's not strictly speaking correct then.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, if we go back to those individual sales that we study to determine what the overall market, a general market rate is for a specific property, every sale is between one buyer and one seller that's been negotiated on a certain day, right? We're estimating market value as of our base date, right? So we're looking at all of those sales that have taken place over the course of 12 months in 2023, all at different times, all different circumstances, right? So
But all between a willing buyer and a willing
all between a
seller
willing
at
buyer,
a given time.
absolutely between a willing buyer and willing seller on a certain date. So what we want to reflect is what's the typical market value for that property at the base date, which may be 11 months later past the date of sale, or it might be a couple weeks. The sale might have happened a couple weeks before the base date. So we have this range of sales, range of properties that have sold within that 12-month time frame that we study, draw correlation between property attributes and sales prices, which allows us to value other similar type properties in that market area.
So if I could, through you, Madam Chair, so similarly, with data that you get from building permits on new constructions, would that be treated similarly? You know, the building permit may establish the value of this house at $450,000, but that won't necessarily be the assessed value of that house. The values of the surrounding properties and such will impact that as well.
Exactly. So we gather that new information that has been built or something's been constructed or renovated. We gather that new data. That data feeds into our sales comparison approach, most likely if it's a residential property. So now we have new attributes, and then we look to the market. Okay, what are similar type properties selling for in the market with those similar attributes, drawing correlation between those attributes and the sales prices, and then applying to those other properties in the neighborhood. So as attributes change on property, it's important for us to keep up to date with that, so we have an understanding of what is there and what we are valuing, and we use our sales file to help us value that. But it's not necessarily the value of the building permit.
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna build on that.
Yeah.
So when a municipality issues a building permit, you use your own mechanisms to determine the cost of that, the estimated cost. And so you may have a building permit that says $450,000 on it. Building permit value does not translate into assessed value. We have to go through our own costing mechanisms to determine what the value is of the construction at that date, whether it's partially or complete. So we just want to make sure that there's clarity between the permit value on the permit versus what is actually added to the assessment roll.
I now understand why, after the fire that we had when we built a two-car garage instead of replacing the barn and garage that burned, why my assessment went up higher than I had anticipated based on the value of the structure I built. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Next to speak is Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, sorry that we're a little late. Good to see some familiar faces over the last number of years. Welcome back. One of the things I want to know, do you guys factor in where these buyers are coming from as part of that assessment of sales? Because I'll give you in my area where I live, during the pandemic and post-pandemic, there was a couple families that moved down from Ontario. And next thing you know, 9 of their friends all bought homes, sight unseen, well above asking price because it was so, in their words, cheap to come here. So it's like an artificial inflating the value of an area by having 9 to 10 homes sell for what realistically is $200,000 to $300,000 more than they should have ever sold for. But now you have 9 to 10 sales in an area. That's going to adjust, And the same thing, we had some people come from Iceland, some Germans and things like that that have bought homes. And it's completely different than what the market value for a Nova Scotian buying a home is when you have international and out-of-province buyers. So is that weighed anywhere in your guys' calculations?
I think I'll start that one and pass it over to Jeff. And sort of within the definition of market value are things like informed purchasers, informed sellers, and reasonable periods of time, and include it with willing buyer, willing seller. And I think the trend through that COVID period, and you just stated that they bought them for outrageous prices. There was undue influence in regards to there's a pandemic, and they were purchased very quickly, and those types of things. So that all builds into it. But location, where they're coming from, not necessarily, but that analysis of was this a market value sale or was it purchased at a premium, those types of things. And I'm going to throw it over to Jeff as well. Knowledgeable purchasers, they didn't know the area, but they were willing to buy that much and pay that much. Those types of things are in the market value sort of analysis.
Yeah, and it's, they start off as individual sales, and then we see multiple sales, and we see the happening in the market areas across, it was across the province that we would have seen during this time frame. But, we refer to Section 42 of the Assessment Act, which requires that we value property at its market value as of the base date. So, again, I'll just use 2025 as the example. So sales from 2023, and what's the estimate of market value as of January 1st, 2024? So what's happening in the market is being reflected, and we study the market. We analyze those sales. To Paul's point, we understand there's always different. Every buyer and seller presents different circumstances to a sale and how the price is negotiated on that certain date. But we do look to see what's happening in the market at the base date. And then those sales happen, and we report them through the assessment roll after we analyze the sales. And we, currently we're moving towards 2026, and we'll be studying sales that have occurred during 2024 and to see how they've changed since 2023.
Yeah, because I know during that period, Nova Scotia was the safest place in North America. It was highly desirable. Mm-hmm. And I remember the whole cap came in because of foreign investment buying up the South Shore and putting people that had farmsteads there for 100 years couldn't afford the taxes to stay, right? So I was hoping that there would be some mechanism to recognize when foreign investment or out-of-province purchases are happening, it's not vindictive to the market value of where the people live, because it's a lot different when you're going from those situations. And I've lived all across Canada and different places in the world, and I'll tell you, you move to some areas in the UK, Australia, and you think you're getting the greatest deal in the world coming from Canada with the acreage and stuff you can buy. But for there, it would be considered paying an outrageous price too.
Speaking a little bit more to our sales investigation process, because before the sales get analyzed for the assessment roll. There's actually a component where we get the sales from the land registry and assessors actually review them. They'll go on to Viewpoint or real estate websites, see if there's any new data that was listed in the listing that we don't have captured. They'll call the buyer, they'll call the seller to really understand what was motivating you to buy this house. Was it cash unseen, like in the middle of a pandemic? Then we know, okay, this amount of sales maybe have a little bit of market trends happening, and that's why the sales price automatically becoming the assessed value actually skews market assessment. So we take those sales, we take regular sales that happened, and we create the market range for a neighborhood. So that's why you might also see different houses within a neighborhood have slightly different assessed values, is because it's a market range according to the specific details of that house, but also how that specific market, whether it's a street or a large urban area, is actually trending in the market.
Yeah, because like in my area, the average family home used to sell between 179 and 250, and they're all assessed at over 600 now. So these people have purchased homes, mortgaged them for 25 years based on their income, and if they all of a sudden had to pay full quote-unquote market value and taxation on their homes, they'd lose their homes because they couldn't afford that type of taxation because that's not what they invested in for 25 years. So it's one of those things that's been inflated a lot by a lot of investment coming from other areas. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Counselor. Seeing no one left to speak. Oh. Warden, if you would take the chair, I just have a couple questions. Thank you. This may be a repeat question from last year as well, but I'm just wondering, when it comes to immediate family members, if a property changes hands, are they exempt from, does the cap stay the same?
Transaction occurs between immediate family, they remain eligible for the cap.
Okay. My second question is, do you keep track of the number of phone calls that you have versus how many of those phone calls actually turn into an appeal? Like how many phone calls you field and how many people are, they get it resolved by a phone call and they end up not actually going to an appeal?
We wouldn't necessarily have that because a lot of property owners call us just asking for information, and then through that education and discussion with the assessor, either it's resolved for them or they have enough information to not want to appeal. So it'd be hard to measure, but what we would have is a provincial overview of the amount of inquiries, phone and email that we received throughout the year, down to we could even do through the appeal period, the 31-day appeal period, and measure that against the overall provincial appeal total that we've received.
I see. Okay.
When people do appeal, we do get a lot of withdrawals as well, just through the appeal process. The assessor will call, have that conversation. Maybe they didn't call us during the inquiry period, and so
Okay.
there is a mechanism to withdraw an appeal as well.
Okay, interesting. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
One final question. So you had the number on the screen that we can give folks to call if they have any questions. And I'd love to be able to give people the PVSC number, trust me. Because when people are angry over their taxes and they don't want to understand that we cannot reduce their taxes, we can't do that. So that number, that's 5 days a week, Monday to Friday from 9 to 5?
So during the inquiry period, Monday through Friday, 4:30 to 8:30, I'm backwards, 8:30 to 4:30 would be our hours. And you had said something that made me trigger. Oh, I was gonna say, we really actually encourage folks to call. If you do get questions from your constituents, please send them to us. We're happy to have those conversations. And usually there's that education component that can really help have them understand our market values. We can review comparable sales with them. We can go through their property data and make sure that everything is up to date and where it should be.
unfortunately, sometimes when we get the calls, it's because they're not happy with the calls they've had with you folks.
Yeah, and some of those calls are difficult. We do training every year with our staff. This year we've really emphasized with our staff that municipalities have yet to set budgets, have yet to send out tax bills. So if a property owner is calling us and they're saying, "I don't like my taxes," it's actually not related specifically to their taxes for this year. It's related to the assessment, and so we got to make sure that we're listening and understanding what the calls are, so that we can hopefully mitigate some of those additional calls that you might get when you're into your tax billing period.
And just a reminder, I see that the screen has locked up, but in the information we provided, that inquiries at PVSC, that's for property owners. So, refer them to that number and it will go through, and we're on call, ready for those calls, standing by.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no more questions, thank you very much for your presentation. It's always very informative, and yeah.
Thank you for having us here, Madam Chair, Council. We look forward to next year as well.
Thank you. Okay, and that moves us to our next item on the agenda, which is the overview of budget topics, dates, and process. Was a very shallow decision.
We're good. We'll wait for them.
No, I don't think. I think you can go ahead, Wade.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're here tonight to start off our budget process for 25-26. And in your CCOL, you should have these documents in front of you. And we'll go along according to this presentation here. So the first I'm going to do is an overview of the topic, states, and process for the 25-26 budget. The presentation slides are going to be very similar to what councilors have seen in the past. We have close to 60 slides to go through on the operating budget side. You should all have budget binders in front of you tonight with the hard copies of the draft documents. You should have a copy of the draft operating budget. You should have a copy of the draft business plan document, and you should have a hard copy of the slides that you're going to see here tonight as well. And as we go through the whole budget process, we'll add to those binders. If you want to leave them here, and we'll add them prior to the meeting, or if you want to take them and bring them back, we'll have the sections ready for you that we continue to progress through. As you might see in some of these slides, you're going to see a page number that it's referring to, which is the page number of the operating budget document.
to help you kind of weather your way through the document itself. Want to remind council that, as we're preparing this document, we did keep in mind the strategic plan that is now in its final year and about to, in the not too distant future, start with a new strategic plan. But that is one of the basis of, as we prepare our budget, keeping in mind that multi-year strategic plan. I want to remind councilors that this is very much draft. These are draft documents that you're getting. It is very likely that changes are going to be coming to these documents and changes that you as council may want to see. So again, very much draft. I'm going to be referring to my notes as we go along, and the CAO would really appreciate any feedback you might have for her on the budget process, good, bad, or ugly, so keep that in mind if you want to provide her with feedback. And if the chair is okay, my thought is that council members should ask questions as we go slide by slide. You'll keep things interesting and kind of address your questions as we go along, if that's okay.
If that's,
Yeah.
if that's your preference, I think that would be fine. Before you get going, Wade,
Yeah.
can I just interject and say, we have regrets from Councillor Hebb. He had a work commitment this evening, so I just wanted to add that before you proceed.
Okay. Moving on to the next slide. We have talked about this in the past, but just a reminder that these are the scheduled dates we have so far for the budget discussions. We've already had the 21st where we had a preliminary information. Tonight's the 30th. So including tonight, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dates set aside to talk about various budget issues, and we can add more if needed. As you recall, those were here last year. We had several meetings going into March last year. I wanted to just have a short talk about the whole budget process from an organizational perspective. This is a fairly long process. It's a fairly involved process. There are quite a few people involved here at the municipality. We have senior budget managers, directors involved in from a time frame as early as October, going right up to present to help draft the document, the business plans, the capital budget plans. Finance staff are meeting with all those people on the CAO and going over various assumptions and budget matters. There is a great deal involved here. Sorry. As our guests from PBSE were saying, they provide us with information usually mid to late December on the roll. That's the information they provide to us about all the assessments and properties every year. And we take that and we load it into our SAP software, and that we do various checking and reconciliations on it to make sure we have the right information. And that gives us our revenue that we can expect for the next year from our assessments. And essentially, that leads us to where we are today, and that's spending time with you to go over the various budget documents. Let's see. Oh, I want to take a moment and just say thank you so very much to Jordan and Janice. Jordan and Janice are very knowledgeable on the budgets. They're the most knowledgeable people in the organization, and they do all the heavy lifting. And very grateful for all the work that they do. This is actually Janice's last year. She's retiring very soon, February 21st. So she's been with us for over 20-some years, and I thank the Lord that she stayed till February 21st to get us through her last budget process. She's extremely helpful to us in that respect. And but not to worry, we do have Jordan, who's trained under Janice for several years now, and Jordan will be taking over as manager of finance here after Janice retires. So we're in good hands. As far as topics are concerned about the operating budget, we have quite a lot to talk about, and we'll talk about it over several nights. Here is the list of items that I have come up with so far, and I'm sure there's going to be other things that come up as we talk more about the various operating budget issues. So it's the draft operating budget, that's the actual document that you see in your CCOL. It's attached to the agenda item. The formal document, which is actually what I would call the public document that will be put on our website once it's all approved and finished. Of course, that document also has all the tax rates in it that we are proposing. And again, those are draft tax rates. The draft business plans, which will probably come after we talk about the operating budget. We've talked previously, and there's an issue that we want to follow up with and address that was brought up by one of the councilors in relation to comparative tax rates between East Hands and West Hands. We'll have Joe present to us on the district community grants. We'll be talking about the fire department levies, and as you know, we already have at least one fire department that is considering raising their levy in this fiscal year. We have lots to talk about the Sportsplex. Scott Preston will be joining us, as I'm sure Alana, and they'll be talking about the facility revitalization and the rates review. And finance want to talk about the Sportsplex as well, about the revenue that we're seeing, the expenditures and the area rate. So we'll be talking about that at times as well. And as we go along, I'm sure that we and yourselves will find things that we think need to be adjusted in the drafts that we brought forward. So we will we'll keep tally of these adjustments we want to make as we go through this. So we won't lose track of anything that needs to be changed. Now, I know, we'll talk here about what we're coming forward with from a draft perspective, and these are all of the issues that I can identify right now that I think we need to talk about on the operating side. And I know council are probably eager to get to the tax rates and they have some opinions on where they might want to go with some of those tax rates. But I would encourage council to take in all of this information before, you make final decisions on tax rates. There is a lot to consider here. That's just my opinion. Of course, after the operating budget, there's two non-operating budget issues, the 5-year capital budget and the water utility budget. The 5-year capital budget is a very long and substantial document. Last year was over 116 pages, and it's going to likely be larger this year as it continues to grow in complexity. The water utility budget is much smaller document, is usually very quick to get through. When we're finished this whole process, we should have all of these outputs. We should have an annual operating budget. We should have annual tax rates. We should have an annual operating budget for the water utility, a 5-year capital budget, and annual business plan document. That will be the final output from our discussions. Yeah. So now we're going to get in and talk about the actual aspects of the 25-26 draft operating budget that you have with you and in your documents and on the CCOL as well. The first thing is to talk about, let's see. I just want to say, these slides that we have here are really reflecting a great deal of what's in the actual draft that you have, the actual true operating draft operating budget. And they're kind of summarizing quite a bit within that document. It's also adding additional information at times as well. So that's what all these slides are trying to do. I want to now talk about the actual tax billing process. So, the billings that actually go out to our residents. So this process, it really starts with the roll from the PVSC that they just sent out in January. And our staff go through them and confirm all the numbers and the error rates. There is a interim tax bill posted, printed, and mailed in late March or early April. And it's due June 1st, and it's simply a calculation of 50% of last year's total bill, and that's as simple as it gets for the first bill of the year. But the final tax bill is posted, printed, and mailed in July, due October 1st. And it's the actual calculation of, using the actual determined tax rates for that year and the assessments. So you can see there the little formula: assessments times tax rates plus number of dwellings times the waste management fee. As our folks from PBSVs were saying, if residents don't agree with the assessments, they can appeal to them. Normally in the past, East Hants has been fairly quick relative to other municipalities in relation to getting their budget done, which does have some benefits from a contractual lining up contractors prior to this spring and summer rushes. So that does have a benefit in some ways. Let's see, tax assessments. Again, the responsibility to assess properties is not the municipality, it's the PVSC. There's three main types of assessment: residential, resource, and commercial. They provide the dwelling unit information changes from year to year, and they apply the CAP assessment program based on the Nova Scotia Consumer Price Index, which for 2025 was 1.5%. I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier, but taxpayers have 30 days to appeal their assessments. And the assessments that the municipality generate and the revenue it generates is not the only revenue and assessments out there that we receive funds for. So there's designations of forest properties less than 50,000 acres, forest properties over 50,000 acres, wind farm taxes, farm property acreage, and federal and provincial grants in lieu of taxes. So as some examples of some of those numbers that we're dealing with in this fiscal year that we're planning, 25-26, forest properties less than 50,000 acres, our budget is indicating $43,000 in revenue. Excuse me, forest properties $50,000 greater than 50,000 acres is $23,000. Wind farms $85,000. Farms $138,000. Crown lands $45,000. Grants in lieu of $45,000. That's from the federal government for RCMP and post offices. And provincial grants in lieu around $156,000. So there's a wide range of other assessment revenue that's coming in. The general tax rate has a wide range of expenditures that are encompassed by the general tax rate. You can see in this slide, it mentions a lot of them: the RCMP and other protected services, animal control, EMO, hazmat, inspection, provincial transfers for educational regional libraries, the PVSC costs that we pay to them, the general administration for things like the CAO office, HR, corporate services, finance, information services, economic and business development, parks and recreation culture, like aquatics, library, tourism, park development committee grant, planning and development, roads and operations.
So if I can just interject again,
Yeah.
Councillor Rhino, would you like to comment as we're going along?
I thought that was the purpose,
It is, yes. And I just,
through you to Wade, we resource forest, and you were talking greater than 50 and less than 50. Is there not another category where it's managed forest and non-managed forest? Is there a breakdown there again?
I'm not aware of a managed or unmanaged forest designation. Are you aware of one, Jordan or Janice? No?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. While we're on this, I want to talk about some of the increases this year. We have talked about this previously, but we did have a significant increase in the RCMP dollars from the previous year. We're dealing with $304,000 increase. And the education amount that we have to pass on to the province is $847,000, so that's fairly significant. It should be noted that fire departments are not part of the general tax rate. They are separate. They have their own levy. But they are generating a amount of, when you look at our total revenues and how much they're generating, it's almost 9% of the total revenue of over $46 million. They're bringing in around $4.4 million for this year. And, okay, pass that on. Waste management fee, again, another item that's covered under the general tax rate. The waste management includes waste, recycling, and compost, collection, transportation, and processing contracts, waste management center operations, debt related to it, environmental monitoring, post-closure costs, reserve transfer, household waste, household hazardous waste programs. And to cover those costs, there's a per dwelling unit charge. One of the things that you're going to notice in this draft that we have is that we are proposing an increase in that per dwelling unit charge from $220 to $230 per unit this year. We have, for those councillors who were here last year, we had a significant discussion about that whole charge and the fact that the break-even point is above what has been charged for some time. The current break-even rate that we're calculating is $255 per dwelling unit, and we're proposing to go from $220 to $230. Now, there are reserves in relation to the waste management, approximately $1.36 million at the moment. Now, you'll also recall that we've had discussions in the past year or so in relation to the EPR program, which, God help me, I can't remember that acronym what it's for, but essentially, what's that? Extended Producer Responsibility. Very good, thank you. It's all about a possible change in how we deliver those services for waste management. And as you've been informed recently by staff, this is being looked at, but we're in a state right now where the province plans to move forward with it in late 2025, but we really don't know very much at this point in time. We don't know if we're going to proceed with this or not. And we don't know the financial implications of it. So for the moment, this draft budget does not take any of those numbers that we really don't know to any certainty at all yet. So at the moment, we are proposing to move forward slightly from 220 to 230. And hopefully, by this time next year, we'll know a lot more about this EPR program and if we are going to participate or not and what the financial impact will be for us. But right now, we really don't know very much at all.
Okay, we'll take a question from Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, through the chair. Two questions. When you do the per dwelling unit, does that include, how does that affect apartment buildings, multi or duplex? Would that be like 4 to 40 for a duplex? And what would you say? Okay. The second question, it's been years that I've seen this 220. Any idea how long that's been in place? Just out of curiosity, I guess.
I thought
I
we
know we'll
actually-
get questions.
I thought we increased that recently, did we not? It's been for a few years.
Been a while, I think.
I don't off the top of my head.
No
Apparently it's
rush.
been several years. But we can check and get back to you later.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next to speak is Counselor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff. Yeah, no, I was surprised that we weren't increasing this last year, especially when we were going through the contract negotiations and seeing how much more the trucking costs would be and where we had to truck our stuff to as our providers changed. So I think this is a good step to understand where we're at. I believe I read somewhere that 255 is actually the break-even point. So we're still well below what we're forecast even point. So I believe we're doing good due diligence there. And then as the EPR numbers get known before next budget, we'll be able to adjust, I think, much better.
Thank you. And Madam Warden?
Thank you. Just before we move on, talking about back to the increase in the amount that we are going to be required to remit to the province for education. And I understand, having been here a lot of years, that they base that on a uniform assessment. But I would like to ask if at some point while we're in these budget discussions, and I'll make a motion if we have to, if we could find out the amounts being paid, the education amounts being paid by other municipalities. I would also like the population of those municipalities. And I would also like to know how much is being spent in each municipality by the Provincial Department of Education. I am just curious to see those numbers. So I don't know, do I need a motion or can I just ask if we can try and get those figures?
My thoughts is you don't need a motion. We can follow up on it. Certainly not information we have at our fingertips here, and we'd be entirely dependent upon provincial sources to provide that number.
I
Yeah.
believe we might well be able to get some of the education amounts from the other municipalities. And I'm
If
sure
they-
folks kind of see where my brain is going with this. But
Yeah. We could certainly, make inquiries and try to bring it forward. I don't know how quickly everybody would respond, that we'd have to
my concern is
contact.
that our amount is going up 700, 800,000, almost $1 million every year of what we have to pay. And I'm afraid if the amount that the province is spending in East Hants is going up by that much, I'm really not seeing it. So I'd just like to see, are we overpaying to educate our children for the benefit we're getting from this?
20% raises go constantly.
So, anyway, if we could check in and see if we could get those numbers and, do your best. Might have to be FOIPOP'd, I don't know. But I'd certainly be interested if they were available, if we could have a look at those. Thank you.
Yep, we'll certainly do our best to try to get that information, yeah. So, area rates. Just want to talk about, in addition to the general tax rate, certain areas may have certain additional area rates. Excuse me. And those area rates are for services only relating to that area. And each of those area rates is a self-contained budget, if you will. They have an income statement, they have their expenditures, and they have their surpluses and deficits, and the difference at the end of each year will go to or from the related reserve. Some of these area rates, the urban service rate is one. There's street lights for Rod and Mount Uniac. There's a Sportsplex area rate and the Mount Uniac recreation rate. In the draft budget that we've presented so far, the USR itself had no change with the exception of Milford. That has a 2-cent increase for wastewater costs, and we'll come to that in a further slide and talk about that a little bit more. Sportsplex has held at 4 cents, and all the other area rates have stayed the same. The urban service rate, just a note that Shubenacadie and Milford pay a surcharge in relation to historically lower assessments. Milford pays for wastewater through an area rate. Pays for streetlights, sidewalks, hydrants paid to the water utility. And there's contributions from outside of service areas for streets, lights, and sidewalks in designated areas R4, R5, and R6. But on top of the urban service rate, there is a waste management fee. And that waste wastewater management fee is charged based. It's not charged to home in Milford because there is no water service. And the proposed rate in this draft for this has not changed. It's still sitting at $2.40 per cubic meter.
CAO?
Yeah.
Just to interrupt for a second, the question for Councillor Dixon, the dwelling unit fee was put to $220 in 2015. So it's been 10 years since it's been increased? Yeah. It was $205 in 2014, and it went to 220.
People ask that question, at least we've got a good answer.
Yeah.
It's been 10 years we've been able. Thank you.
And now we have some information in relation to the assessment cap. So you can see here that the current year's assessment cap rate is 1.5%. You have some historical figures going back 2021 through to 2025. 2021, the taxable assessment loss was $178 million, and in 2025, it's grown to $1.23 billion. And you'll note that approximately 82% of residential properties are capped in East Hants. Now, this $1.23 billion in capped assessment equals to $9.8 million in tax revenue at 24-25 rates. And it represents approximately 25 cents of our 24-25 proposed tax rate. That's a fairly significant number. So the reality, in 2024, the residential tax rate was 80 cents per 100 instead of the 55 cents it would have been if everyone paid taxes based on their market assessment. This cap was introduced back in 2005 to protect taxpayers who were seeing a sudden and dramatic increase in their property tax bills. The tax burden from this program is being moved to new homeowners who are not initially in the cap program. And I know the CAO likes to talk about this subject, and I thought perhaps I would give her an opportunity to talk some more about it, if she wished.
Wade's putting me on the spot, but I very rarely have little to say about the CAP program. Councillors, I really don't know where we're at with the CAP program in the province right now. The Conservative government hasn't wanted to put it on any kind of agenda. And what it's doing to our tax system, it's still doing, making that the gap between homeowners who are paying way more in taxes for the same homes and the same services that they're getting in our communities, to me, is something that just shouldn't happen in the type of tax system that we have and we've come to rely on. I do think there's some risk as this gap gets wider that councils are going to have to start looking at some tax policy that moves away from assessment-based taxation to more per unit or per property-based taxation. I don't think you're going to get there overnight, But I think East Hants, especially with the massive difference that we have in our homes here in East Hants, I think that's something that this council should be looking at as part of your next strategic plan, to look at your tax policies and you know, even if you don't change them, to at least understand what you're doing and how these tax rates that we're setting are impacting homeowners in East Hants. Because I always use the example of a duplex. You can have a duplex that's had the same owners for 20 years on one side and new owners the year before on the other. And the difference in the assessments for that one duplex are significant enough that the tax bill difference, several years ago, the tax bill would have been $400 or $500 different. So if I did the math today, I'm sure that you would have, $800, $900 difference in a tax bill for exactly the same services. So that was never the intent of the CAP program. It has been changed over the years. PI, so it's no longer doing spike protection. It's just doing, keeping everybody's assessments lower, which people think that they're getting a better deal because their assessments are capped. But we know, based on this comparison, that if we didn't have a CAP program, your tax rate would be much lower. So not everyone who is in the CAP system is paying less tax. They could be paying less tax under the market-based system because your tax rate would be lower. So I think it's something that this council should look at. Again, not necessarily to change everything, but at least to be aware of what your options are and to look at that as a way moving forward. I think there is some risk to PVSC for the future because I don't know that we can stay at this market, a cap-based system, and still keep equity in your tax system in Nova Scotia. Yes, there's reasons why you would want to keep the cap, and those things can be kept. You do want spike protection. You do want protection from, foreign ownership coming and raising prices in certain areas. That is what the original cap program was intended to do, and it did it very well. But we've moved away from that, so I think that's something that we've been fairly quiet on it over the last 4 or 5 years. I think council should at least take a look at what some of the alternatives might be. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Yeah, with the cap, last year we had 89% of our homes in cap. We're down to 82%. So that shows a move of more out. But that drastic spike has happened again. I quickly did math on 3 widows that live in my area, and their tax bill under their cap is around $2,000. If they were not under cap at 55%, 55 cents, they'd be paying $3,800. It's an increase of 85% on their tax bill. All right? They bought their homes years ago with what they could afford. They're living on their pensions based on what they have. So if we get rid of the cap program, be prepared for the most vulnerable people in our society to lose their homes because they can't afford to pay the taxes. Now, I do think we have to move to a per unit based tax system for some things, especially when it comes to certain services, because I know when we talk about fire levies, the rate might be lower in my area, but per unit, per household, my people are paying a lot of money for fire service, right? Even though we have the lowest rate in the municipality based on the assessment. So you're paying 13 cents on a $700,000 house, or you pay 23 cents on a $150,000 house, you're only paying $180, even though your rate is higher, and the other ones are paying $400, $500. That's literally one of the things that has to be looked at if we start going to a per unit thing, especially if we want the fire services across the board to all be treated equally. People have to realize that he'll have to go to a per unit what cost is. And then in some areas, the rate might be higher, but their overall cost to their fire service, what they're putting into it, is actually quite a bit lower than some areas that have a lower rate. That's the actual numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next to speak is Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I could agree with what everybody's saying, and I could not agree too. So I don't understand why a normal person that bought their house should pay for the mistakes that people did in 2021, 2022, and start buying their houses with a bid war, paying $100,000 and $200,000 over asking price. So I don't think the normal person should pay for that. And now the cap, it wasn't like that before. It was a margin, but it wasn't 25 cents. But what drove that is a bidding war that inflated everything. So I bought a house in 2019. It was $210,000. The assessment on it is $460,000 now. I shouldn't be paying for that mistake that people did and bought their homes way overpriced. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Next to speak is Counselor Rhino.
Oh, I was looking forward to change, sorry.
I'm fast.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I've been around this chamber for a long time, and ever since this cap come in. The purpose of the cap was to protect homeowners from inflation that was going up, driven by properties that were bought by foreign ownership, and thus driving the price up. That's why it was created. It was created for that purpose, to protect them. I do believe the cap system needs to be tweaked. What the CAO brought up about two identical properties, and because one sold compared to the other one, they're paying a higher rate. I totally get that. It has to be tweaked, but I don't think it should be removed. Councillor Perry hit it right on the head. He said, if we remove that cap, he said, it's gonna drive up assessment values and taxes for people who are struggling now from day to day, and put an onus on them. Every year I hear this. So if you put the assessment up here and drop the rate drops, you're still gonna be paying around the same amount of dollars as it goes this way. So you're never gonna tell me any different. I've had this argument before. I leave the cap, but I do believe that it has to be tweaked in some fashion to protect some things, so everything once it's sold is treated more equitably. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Next to speak is the CAO.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with Councillor Rhino and both councillors from Mount Uniacke. There is tweaks to be made to this program that should be made. It shouldn't go away. It did have a purpose for spike protection. I do want to clarify, though, that Councillor Perry's comment about it's going to hurt the most vulnerable population, we've done massive amounts of data reflection on what removing the cap, or what the cap program is doing across Nova Scotia. And you can very clearly see that in the lower income areas of Nova Scotia, those people are paying more in tax than they would otherwise pay across the board. Because the homes in those areas aren't going up by as much of a percentage in market value than the homes in the higher end, higher valued neighborhoods. And you can see where you have your $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 homes, they're going up quite significantly in market value. So under the CAP program, they're getting that benefit. But across the board, seniors, low-income individuals who live in lower value homes, and new homeowners are paying more under the CAP program. The data is irrefutable. What that data doesn't capture are the one-offs. So if you have a senior on a fixed income on a lake who does have that assessment that's going really quite high, they are the exception to the rule, but they are truly an exception, because you can see in the maps across the province, you know, if people are paying more under the CAP program, their entire neighborhood is is red, if that's the color that depicts that. And you can see where all of the lower end valued homes across the province are paying more under the CAP program. That is the data. So, or that was the data 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't imagine it's changed much since then. But, you know, I was talking with a few people earlier in the week. To redo that data would probably be very valuable for Nova Scotia right now. And then you could take a look at what tax policies should come out of that. But it is a misconception that the vulnerable populations in this province will pay more tax, because it's just not what the data tells us will happen, except for those exceptions where you fit into two groups that don't usually align with each other. Yeah, so that's, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next to speak is Councillor McPhee.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Deputy Warden McPhee.
Oh. Just while the CAO was reading this, I thought I'd just do a quick calculation, see what the difference would be on my home. I bought my home in 16th of January 2002, so I've had it for 23 years. And if I paid on the full assessment, I'd pay $20 more. So I'm probably in a kind of an average assessment, I would say. So just to give some background, not arguing one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Next to speak is Warden Rolston.
Thank you. And when the data was originally done and we used to look at it, there was always a home that was the break-even value, above which, you know, if your house was valued above that number, you would pay, I think it was less under the full taxation and more. The danger is, and I understand what the CAO is saying, but I think the data would have to be redone, because I think the COVID bubble and the COVID spike has changed that data. I don't think it will look the same anymore. I look at my own property and how much the assessed value has gone up on that, and it's still not as highly assessed as homes down here. But when I look at what homes are selling for in the rural area, and I'm sure that Councillor Rhino sees it too, homes that were selling, that if someone got $110,000 for it 4 or 5 years ago, people thought, wow, they got a good price out of that, are now selling for $250,000, and they're exactly the same. Nothing's been done to change them. So one thing that the COVID spike did do to the rural areas, and probably not just in this municipality, was greatly impact the market value of homes in the rural areas, to the point that I think new data would perhaps look a little different. So, and I hear the ups and the downs of the cap, and the cap certainly isn't fair. Assessment-based taxing isn't fair, but I've never found any basis for taxing people that is really fair all the way around. So I don't know what the answer is. I've often wondered why, when a property is sold in Nova Scotia and it's bought by a resident of Nova Scotia, not a non-resident, why should the cap be removed from that property when it changes hands? Perhaps the increases in assessment should be on new builds plus the CPI on everything else. Now, I'm not saying if someone comes in from overseas and pays twice the value of a house that they should get to keep the cap. But homes that change hands in Nova Scotia from family to family, I struggle to understand why the cap even comes off then. But that's just something I wonder about. So we could talk about the cap, and we have talked about the cap many years for lots of times. As the CAO has said, I don't believe the province at this point in time has any interest in going down that road. The only option for municipalities is, look, we don't have to tax based on assessment, but, is to look at the whole thing. And it's going to be difficult to look at it, because it's going to be difficult to try and be fair to everyone, because some people are going to end up paying more so that other people can pay less. And that's the unfortunate situation, the unintended consequence of the cap. It has impacted our residents unfairly in proportion. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Okay, we've got two more people to speak. Councillor Perry.
Thank you. And I should just say clarification. When I said vulnerable, I meant long-term homeowners in areas where there's spikes. They're the ones who have been vulnerable, especially, I mean, you just got to go back and look at the role of what Mount Uniacke was taking in 6-7 years ago for taxation and what it is now. And speaking for my residents, but in speaking to two of the MLAs for our area and here in Hants East and out in Uniacke, that I don't think this is going to be a discussion point for this government. And any time and effort to try and lobby it to them would be wasted effort, because they're not going to look at it. So it's definitely something I wouldn't want our staff wasting time on right now with everything else we have going on until we know we have a receptive audience. Because at NSFM, we've had this conversations go on forever, and one of the things I never understood was if somebody pays for a house, whatever they pay, they should understand that's on. But if you pay $250,000 for your home, and somebody tells you 7 years later it's worth $600,000, now you have to pay tax on that. Well, that person's not getting any dividends. They're not getting anything from that. Their house is still only worth what they paid for it, right? Inflation by CPI is really, all assessments should go up every year beyond what the homeowner paid for it. So this, because the houses around you sell and this and that, your house now doubles or triples in value. For that homeowner that went out and has worked their life to get a mortgage, they did not get a mortgage on a $700,000 house because they could not afford it. They got a mortgage on a home they could afford over a 25-year span. So I think our whole assessment, the way it's done, is flawed. And it's not fair, and especially when you look at now the people trying to get into the market, and we talk about how difficult it is for them at the price point. And I have residents that have called me already with their assessment. They bought their house last year, and their assessment now is well above what they paid for it. And when they talk about market value, how can you get more market value than when you buy your house within 12 months? And so now they're going to appeal and say, we bought our house for this price. And they're being told, well, more houses in your area sold for higher. And it's like, well, we bought our house that we could afford, based our taxes off what we sold, and now they're being said, nope, your house is worth more than what you paid for it. But they're not seeing any benefit of that. And when they go to sell their house, they pay tax. So if your house does go up in value, you end up paying tax for it when you sell it. So this whole assessment-based thing.
Not unless it's very, and not unless you've lived in it for
Under a year. Well, you end up paying tax to somebody. But to me, it just doesn't make sense, because it's something that you don't see a benefit from. You have to live long enough to sell it. You have to, why right now we have a thing where the government is trying to keep seniors in their homes because downsizing costs more than where they would live, because they can't afford to downsize, because the apartments are more than what their houses are for what they're currently paying, because they're under a cap system. So our whole housing market and everything, and I think when we talk about our strategic plan moving forward, a housing strategy for East Hants is definitely something we have to look at, because we do have an aging population. Young people tend to move away. We're trying to attract more here. And so this is something I think we really have to look at, and the per unit based system might be the most equitable way to do it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I was going to ask a question to PVIC about the 2021, 2021, 2022 bubble about, and I remember I asked the question back then about what you're going to do with the assessment. Are you going to assess it for the sale price, or it's going to be lower? Well, they probably lowered it 20,000. And that's what created that big gap, about 25 cents. Because I remember when we used to do the budget in 2019 and 2018, that gap was probably 60,000 the most, or 100,000 between two properties. But now it's like 300,000. Sometimes it's 400,000. Because if you look at the assessment in Mount Uniacke, like everything went up over 100% in the last 5 years. So that gap is getting wider now instead of shrinking. It got wider because what PVSC did. They assessed those homes that were bought for $500,000 or $1 million for $900,000, and they didn't even do that. They brought the lower assessment up $300,000. So they inflate everybody to get it closer. So now it doesn't work in certain area. If you remove the cap, some people are gonna get killed. Like they will be taxed to death. Like if you live in a house in Mount Union that was up in the last 3 years by 180%, that's gonna be not the $20 or $30. Like it's gonna be thousands of dollars. So that I think the data should be reviewed, and if you could in the next budget, if you could bring the data from 2019 or 2018, because every budget we do that assessment and how much would be if the cap was removed, how many cents it would be, and I bet you it was probably 10 cents or 5 cents or 7 cents. It wasn't 25. That's outrageous. I know it's outrageous, but a solution for it, like to remove the cap, is not a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay, no one left. You can proceed.
Okay, on to the next slide, Madam Chair. So this is a short overview of our assessment changes. Overall growth, net of exemptions, has gone up slightly over 9%. Residential, 8.9%. Resource, 3.2%. And commercial, 12.3%. This is a slide that I shared with you at the January 21st meeting. Just briefly, that's showing what I just indicated to you, the year-over-year changes from 25 to 24 in relation to residential, resource, commercial, and overall, numbers that we just stated. And if you recall, two significant changes that I indicated last week is the bylaw F400 exemptions, moving from 15.5 million to 21.3, which is really the primarily one property, I believe CCOA, thank you, property up here, just up the road. And also that I wanted to point out the, excuse me, commercial changes, increase in taxable assessments in commercial was largely due to three properties that added up to a significant number in the commercial properties for year-over-year change. Talking about residential growth, net of exempt properties, 8.9%. The new assessments were $215 million. New properties, however, accounted for 11.1 million of those, or 5.5% of the growth. Existing properties accounted for about 205 million, or 95% of the growth. And we had 281 new dwelling units, and cap of 1.5%, sale properties on cap, and those factors are increasing the assessment on those existing properties.
Okay, we'll just
Excuse
take a
me.
question from Counselor Rhino.
It's not a question, is, I sit around here and I listen to budgets from year to year, and I know you're bringing us information. I understand that.
Yeah.
But when you bring out, okay, here's the increase in exempt properties, I know you probably don't mean it, but it's almost like you're saying this is what we're losing. Exempt properties are exempt for a reason. CCOA has a big new building that's gonna serve a purpose, and it just seems to me that, oh, CCOA, this is what the property is, but we're not getting any taxes. This is what it seems like. I know it's information, but this is how to me, it's coming across, oh, geez, we're losing this. And no, we're not losing this. We're exempting this because it's for the common good and for the better of the public. And that's why I'd like to take exempt properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I'll just get a comment from the CAO.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chairman. So the exempt properties, the reason we make a point of pointing out the exempt properties and how they impact your assessment roll is twofold. One is the public will see the overall increase in commercial assessment for East Hants, and 6.8 million of that is exempt. So that's not reflected in your overall bottom line, but it is reflected in your revenue. So that's the second reason why we have to point out, we feel we have to point out the difference between exempt and billable revenue is because it all gets billed. So CCOA will actually get a bill for taxes for that amount. And then when you look at the expense side of things, you'll see those exemptions given, and they're recorded as a municipal expense on your income statement. So without pointing out that difference, your revenues and your expenditures don't necessarily jump out at the average person. And the benefit of this presentation is not only for counselors who understand the value of what people who get, or groups that get exemptions offer to the community, but also if they're looking at those overall increases, they are inflated if you think about the fact that you also record an expense, which no one will actually see unless they dig deep into our income statement. So that's the reason why. There's no one on this staff or anyone in East Hants that could look at that presentation that was done last week on the bylaw F400 and say that none of those groups are worthy of an exemption. But the way that it's shown in the Municipal Government Act and the accounting manual show that it has to be shown as revenue, and then you have a corresponding expense that you have to record. People don't look at that expense. They just look at the revenue and go, oh, look how much more revenue the municipality is collecting. Well, there's an offsetting expense for that, and that's the only reason we pointed out at this stage of the document.
I understand the show, go, and all this, revenue, I understand that. But somehow, maybe it's just me, that's how it's coming across, is this is what we're losing, and we seem to concentrate, on that. And it may just be me, but I don't want to take anything away from these groups that are exempt, because that's the way it was coming across, in my opinion, the way it's coming across.
Through your Councillor, Council has always been supportive of providing these groups with exemptions, and that's not intended to come across as we're losing taxes because you exempt them. The accounting presentation of the budget shows that we're getting revenue for these groups from taxes, but we're not actually. We're also giving them an offsetting exemption. That's the only purpose of trying to hammer that home, that those increases aren't what you might see if you looked up East Hants tax roll on the internet. You might see that we have an increase, but understand that we don't. It's not an uptick in revenue from that increase because there's that offsetting expenditure.
Well, like I said, I can understand what it is, but the people watching out there, it may came across to them as it's the same, and I want to make assured that it, to me, and again, council, but that exempt properties are exempt for a reason, and those groups are appreciated, and I'm sure council feels the same. But the way it was coming across, by not explaining it correctly, was it's coming across to me as, we're losing this money. So that's the way I feel.
Thank you, Counselor. Next to speak is Madam Warden.
Thank you. Well, I guess perhaps I'm looking at a little different lens, and maybe it's because I have a bit of an accounting background when I used to live my other life. But I have never felt that that's what that does. I just felt it was providing the information that we as a council had to have as we went through the budget. And any member of the public following the budget discussions is deserving of that information as well. And I would also add, as a member of the audit committee, I think there would be a requirement to report that and to report it this way, because our financial transactions all have to be transparent and above board, and we have to be able to demonstrate very clearly if asked. And I think that's the purpose of reporting it. No one's, if we didn't think it was worthwhile, we wouldn't give the exemptions. And I've never heard from anybody that they don't think we should give the exemptions. And I think that, I don't think there's any attempt by staff or anyone else to say that we're losing money this way. I think it's just simply a financial reporting of the numbers, which is what the budget is. And so I can't see any way that we could not fiscally report these numbers in that way, because that is what the numbers are. And I think we need to be transparent and above board, and if anyone has questions, we answer them and we explain them. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Can you take the chair for a moment, please? Thank you. I would just like to comment on this because I understand that from a numbers perspective, you are probably obligated to put this down. However, I do see where Councillor Reiner was going, that from a human aspect, that I understand what he's saying. It's like when we are proposing a development agreement and we've got a room full of anguished residents who are concerned about their properties, where they're going to live, and in the proposal from staff, we've got, if we accept it, we're going to get this many more tax dollars. And it's just for something that means that much to the residents, that whether it happens or it doesn't, to add that we're gonna increase our tax dollars if we get this approved. I cringe when that happens. So I'm just saying that from a human point of view, maybe it does, I can see what he's saying, but from a numbers point of view, we are obligated to do it. So thank you. And seeing no one left to speak, back to you, Wade.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this slide here is just some information in relation to the top 10 commercial taxable assessments in 2025. And the only thing I'll say about that is, there's been a lot of discussion over the past years in relation to this property, Atlas Structural Systems, and assessment is around $10.6 million this year, and that went up significantly from the previous year. That's all I have to say about that. This is dwelling units additions. Again, just information showing the number of dwelling units increases throughout the over the past year in relation to all of the various districts, just showing kind of how that's increased in the various areas. And then the next slide is simply a bar chart diagram in relation to visually showing how those increases have happened. As you can see, as an example, District 1, 2024, 959 units, and going up to 1,022 in the new year. That's simple as that.
We'll just get a question from Councillor Perry.
Yep.
Thank you. Twofold. The first one goes back to commercial tax assessments. Kudos to the business development group for bringing a lot of business into East Hanson and allowing this to grow the way it has over the last number of years. We talked about before about dealing with PVSC, and there are many places just like we believe are overassessed. There's some that are underassessed, and I think it would be incumbent on us to ensure, especially when we talk about equitable and fairness for all business owners, that everybody's is quote unquote paying their fair share. So it's something that I think going forward we might have to look at. When it comes to the chart there, the last chart that you had up there, the dwelling units year over year change, is this in relation to the? I believe it's on page 23 of your.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And the charts on the next page where you show every district. Now all the districts changed from 24 to 25. So are these numbers pre-change, or are they the change have been incorporated into the numbers?
You want to take that, Jordan?
And we did our best basically to apply the new districts to it. So
Okay.
we got it within a tolerable range. That's why we have asterisks on it throughout the document, but we say it's not going to match the assessment roll perfectly, but we got it to a spot we thought it was good enough to give you a year-over-year comparison.
Okay, no, I just wanted to, I figured that was done, but I just want to make it clear, especially for anybody who's watching. And the first time I read it, that was the first question that came to my head. Well, I know for myself, my district, I lost a bunch and gained some somewhere else. The housing numbers stayed the same, but the actual distribution of value in some areas has changed as well. So that's good. And that's all I have at this point, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next to speak is Warden Rolston.
That was just similar to Counselor Perry. I was going to ask if we were comparing apples to apples, and pleased to hear that staff did that extra work, and we are. Thank you.
And the CAO.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to point out with respect to the, people underassessed and overassessed, we do have an exercise every year. It varies year to year on how much we do the deep dive into them. But for example, that list of commercial investments, we would go through what we know has been investment in East Hants and make sure that those have been sort of valued on the roll. And if we have questions about them, we are in contact with PVSC. I can think of 4 or 5 different conversations that have happened this week alone with PVSC about different properties, either them reaching out to us or us reaching out to them. And just for some of those assessments in the commercial are under construction, so they're current investments, so those will be going up next year as well. That base date that she spoke of December 1st, they sort of value everything at that date. So at least 2 of those properties aren't quite fully constructed yet that I know of.
Thank you.
Next to speak is Counselor Musa.
Thank you, but I think this question was asked. So this dwelling unit is new dwelling unit or the one from changing districts too? So
it's the total number of new dwelling units year over year.
New dwelling units.
Year from 2024 to 2025.
So new build, not new, like not from the changing of districts. Is that included in it or no? Like that's new permits?
They're comparing apples to apples in relation to year over year. It's not the changing of districts that's impacting.
It's the new districts. If it were that new district existed in 2024, that number compared to 2025.
So that including like the one I gained from Michael plus the new dwelling units?
Yes.
No, it would no. It's just the new dwelling units within your geographical area that you have now.
So new build we're talking. We're not talking about the home existing that moved to it.
It's just new builds in your existing geographic area that represents your district.
Wow.
So you got ones that had a road that used to be with me, now go with your number as a new build.
Okay. Do we have any numbers like an assessment number or no? We don't do that.
Through you, Madam Chair, we do have those numbers. We don't have a pretty table for them yet, but we do have them.
Can we get like I'd like to see them too. So for some other discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Next to speak is Warden Rolston.
Thank you. Just to try and clarify and hope not to muddy the waters anymore, if we look at this chart here, the green bars from 2024 represent the numbers from 224 rearranged as best as staff was able, as if today's boundaries had been in place in 2024. So those green bars represent the same districts that are in effect today as opposed to what was actually in effect 2024. They have recalculated the numbers and redistributed them so that they're comparing apples to apples. The green bars represent what was in what is now each district for 2024, and the blue represent the 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden.
Okay.
Back to you, Wade.
Yeah, thank you. So this slide here, number 24, is again just a visual representation of some information for councilors.
As you can see, it's simply indicating in the blue the percentage of dwelling units in the bottom line, the assessed value. This one starts here over the far left at 50,000 K, goes over to all the far right is 500, over 500 K and numbers in between. And the blue is showing the percentage of assessment. So, you know, the conclusions when you get up at the top here, or vice versa, and this one just says dwellings valued at more than 200K, 200,000, make up 52% of the total dwelling units and 75% of assessment base. And that's just some information to consider. Proposed general tax rates. So this is where we're at. General tax rates, as you know, last year's rate for residential and resource was 0.80, and this document is proposing dropping it by half a cent to 79.5 cents. No change in commercial tax rate proposed. The waste management services fee, proposing a $10 increase of $230 per unit. Excuse me. A little bit more information on waste management services fee. Commercial receives service paid in the commercial rate. Actual break even is around 255, we said. Okay, and $282,000 projected to be transferred from reserves in this year. This is simply a pie chart visual diagram in relation to the waste management cost breakdown. As you can see, just breaking down all the various types of costs associated with waste management. The biggest is waste 31%, recycling 21%, organics 14%, waste management center operations 20%, with a few others in there as well. So how do all the numbers add up? So when you talk about the general tax rate, what are all the dollars associated with the costs at the end of the day? And this is what this sheet is trying to indicate. $29.9 million is the total expenditures, but how are we raising the funds to cover those expenditures? And that's what this is showing. So you get your commercial rates raising $5.8 million, you get your residential rate raising $20.8 million, you get your resource rate $587,000, and your waste management rate raising $2.6 million. And it's just that's a minor rounding error down there. $29.9 million. But then this slide is talking about, well, what's happened from the change from 24-25 to 25-26? What's that mean in relation to your total increases from the previous year? So you're comparing the net increases in expenditures from the previous year, and that is $2.5 million. Now, if we had simply kept our revenue numbers the same, it would have raised about $2.4 million for us, but we're making slight changes. These numbers down here are simply reflecting if we were to change any the residential resource GTR number by 1 cent, that would raise an additional $269,000, or vice versa. If you were to cut it, it would cut that, those revenues by $269,000. And then the same for commercial. 1 cent increase is going to raise $22,000 of revenue. This is just a 5-year trend in the GTR rate, just showing that, from 2020, the actual rate itself has been steadily dropping over that period. This is a 1 cent raise by district. And if you were to change these, as you said, I mentioned that you change your 1 cent raise of the GTR, residential resource, It's going to change your overall revenue by $269,000. And this diagram just shows you where is it all coming from? What would happen in the various districts? And the same for commercial. If you change your rate by 1 cent, where does it all come from? What districts? That's what that is showing. This slide is simply trying to show a trend. The blue line is your general tax rate. The green line infield residential all-in rate is your top line up here, and rural is an example of a rural all-in rate as well. So it's a residential tax rate trends from 2017 to 2025. So it's demonstrating what we saw visually previously, a trend in trying to reduce those rates over time. And this is just the exact same thing, but applying it to the commercial rate as well. Now,
Can I just, before you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just get Councillor Musa here an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been on for a while with, so you gotta scroll back.
one of these. Page 24? Oh, this one? Oh, yeah, okay.
So here, we're talking about the assessment and the cap assessment. Like that included the cap property or no?
Those are taxable.
Those are all taxable assessment, like the one with the cap or, oh, okay. So they're going down like a lot, like the less than 50,000 and stuff like, everything.
No, they're going up. The blue.
The blue represents the percentage change in dwelling units,
The yellow was assessed value.
and the yellow is percentage of assessment. And the conclusion is dwelling units valued at more than 200K make up to 52% of the total dwelling units of 75% of the assessment base.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay? Yep.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, this graph, unlike all of the others, isn't showing a change in anything. It's just showing that, so if you go to the very far right on the page, it's showing that those dwelling units in blue, which are less than most of the other categories, are paying most of the tax because they have most of the assessment.
Okay.
So it's really, we've been showing you this table for years, just to show where your distribution of taxes are being paid for based on the values of the homes.
Yeah.
This isn't by district, or it's not a change
it-
from one year to another. It's just a distribution of tax
Distribution,
based
yeah, I
on
got it
house
now, yeah.
value.
Yeah, but is there any way for next budget that we could do the previous year to see what changes happening there in those dwellings? Like how much are moving one way or the other?
Yeah, I would say, through you, Madam Chair, the interesting thing to look at would be taking this from like 10 years ago. Every year, it would be a very slight incremental change you probably wouldn't even see.
No, especially no, you will see a lot in
But
those.
if you took it from like a few years ago, you'd probably see a huge difference in how things are being distributed. And Jordan and I were actually talking yesterday about how this really, we should be starting it higher now and going higher, because I think the assessments have
500K,
grown.
the 500K is not,
Right.
Before-
500,000 now is capturing a lot of our assessments.
Yes, yes.
Which isn't really this table could be bumped by 100,000 all along the board.
Thank you.
thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Page 28, Wade. Residential and resource rates, do they have to be tied to be the same? Is there any legislation that says we have to keep those the same? because that's one of the bone of contentions in my area, is that you have people in there running businesses that are paying resource rate, that are disrupting the way of life. And I'm talking about the Mount Uniacke Quarry, and they're running a big business, they're making lots of money selling gravel, and their whole business is assessed at like $26,000. And that's what they pay tax to East Hants on, right? Because that's resource. It's not taxed as commercial. So I don't think when you're looking at, and we go back to the other things and we see all the businesses in our business park that are out there doing things and they're paying $2 and $3 million to run their business, that this seems to be not quite equitable.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that is a perspective. From a tax policy perspective, I think you would want to fully understand what resource actually represents across East Hants, because a lot of the farming community, their properties are assessed resource, non-billable farm lands. You also have a lot of residential properties that have a component of their property which is resource assessed. And you don't have to tax them the same, but you do have to tax all resource the same. So you would be, if you started to change your resource.
I'm not proposing to say, like, make it the same as a commercial tax rate. I'm just saying, a lot of these resources create income, whether it's large plots of lumber and those trucks roll up and down our roads and do all that, and, even farms. We all need to eat, I know, right? But we all got to be able to pay for food to eat too. So it's just something that has always stuck with me, that, you have a $7-8 million farm that pays tax on, a very small portion of their farm. I get that. I understand the reason for that. I support the reason for agriculture. I want to be clear with that. But there's also lots of other things that definitely have a larger economic and social impact on people, on where they live, that are being taxed resource, that should be paying more because of the impact they're having on residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next to speak, Warden Wolfson.
Yeah, I'm just going to be very brief. I think if there is any answer to that, it's with PVSC, because I heard them tell us here today that when they assess properties, they use things like revenue generation and cost. There are many things go in there. So I don't know if they're able to do that on resource-based properties as well, but it might be a question for them next time they're here.
I asked them last year, they said it's based on how we zone it and how we classify it. So if we classify it as resource, that's what they said, told me last year when I asked them.
Back to you, Wade.
Thank you. So this slide is about, again, the amount that the total overall expenditure increases in the GTR from 2024-25 to 2025-26. And instead of showing where we raised the money from, this is showing what are, it's kind of compartmentalizing where those increases have come from. And they come from departmental budget increases of 1.4 million. This is actually a net increase in general revenue, including the detransfer tax, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Fire revenue expenses, various transfers and appropriations, like we already talked about the RCMP and education, but also debt charges, things like that. And then some transfer to reserves. Those are the classification and big kind of scheme of what's causing the increase in the GTR overall expenditures. The next three slides, they are actually kind of even trying to break those numbers down a little bit further with giving you some examples of breaking those numbers down. Again, you can see here these totals up to $1.57 million. which ties into two departmental budgets, 1.57 million. And so it's breaking down those numbers even further. And I'm certainly not going to try to talk about all these numbers, because especially these numbers are going to be covered ad nauseum when we get through the departmental business plans. They will go over those in some depth. You can see a variety of numbers here. I'll actually just take finance as an example. You can see that, and you can see, well, Lord have mercy, what's going on in finance? $464,000. Well, yeah. So there's some logical explanations, for that. The big pictures, there's two big pictures in that. One is, there's two new finance positions in the budget that's causing a little over $160,000 increase year to year. And then going back to what we talked about earlier, and when the CAO explained, when you talked about exemptions, under bylaw 400, and we have to account for it from a revenue perspective. We account for it as revenue, but somewhere we have to account for it as expenditure as well. And that's actually happening here, and those numbers are being captured in that number to the tune of around 100 and close. And I won't spend much time on this, but.
I'll just get a comment from
Yep.
Warden Rolston.
It's 1 minute to 9, which is our time of adjournment.
Oh, yeah.
And just before we adjourned, I just thought it might be prudent, we had some discussion last night on the start and finish times of these meetings. I think we should nail that down before we finish. And just a suggestion with the budget binders, and hopefully it won't matter, but take it for what it's worth. Anyone who likes to follow in the actual physical budget along slide by slide as they do it, take it home. If you're happy following along on the screen, go ahead and leave it here. If you want, I'm just thinking if we get another miserable snowstorm on a budget night and we don't want to cancel the meeting, if those who want the budget binder have it, it makes it much easier to do it virtually. So that was one suggestion. The other suggestion is what do we want to do with changing the times of the budget meetings? I don't know that we need a motion or anything, but anyway, I'll turn that to the CAO.
So councillors, I think you have, we did lose a budget meeting evening to a public information meeting. So I think we're down to, we have 4 in your calendar. We have 3 after this in your calendar. So if you were to reduce the time, your options are to start at 6:30, go till 9. You can start at 7 and go till 9. You can start at 7 and go till 9:30, which would keep your schedule on track. If you go from 7 to 9, then we would suggest that you have to add another meeting to your schedule to accommodate that loss of time, because there is a lot of information to get through. So you can do 7 to 9, but we would have to add another meeting to the budget schedule. And we may have to do that anyway. What we've set in place is sort of based on your typical budget cycle. We may have to add more to the end of it anyway, but if you went to the 2 hours for a meeting, we would definitely have to add another one to the cycle to get through what we intend and we know that you want to talk about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On to speak is Councillor Rhino.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, as I stated last night, kind of when we wrapped up that Zoom meeting, 9 o'clock for the people that are working and trying to travel and have to get up the next morning is stressing. Now, I understand that 6:30 may be taxing to some people over there, but I can remember budgets going here way into June. Now, that's a long time ago. That's a lot of meetings. So, I mean, if we had if it's agreeable from 7 to 9, if we have to tack another meeting or 2 onto that, I don't think that's very outrageous, right? After 9, you can only absorb so much, and I think going into 9:30 is pushing the limit, right? Now, I'm available. Like for me, 6:30 is not bad, but I can hear other people that it's hard to get here for 6:30. But really, it's 6:30 or 7 doesn't matter. But The wrap-up time does. For people that are still working, and have to get up at 4 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, it's hard on the system. So.
Thank you, Counselor. Next to speak is Deputy Warden McPhee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't mind doing extra meetings if that's what we need, if we shorten them up, but the 6:30 to 9 works well for me. I mean, I am retired, I could stay longer, it's not really a big deal, but I know I used to work, and I know I wouldn't want to if I was working, so, yeah, well, you didn't know what my job was. Anyway, yeah, Councillor Rhino does. Yeah, when you get that call at 5 in the morning for an accident, yeah. But anyway, I'm fine either way. It's, but I don't think we want to extend them past 9 o'clock, I guess was my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Next to speak is Warden Ralston.
Just a comment, I think we all have to remember that we don't all live in equal distance from this facility. It is not central to the municipality. And just because we represent districts that are further out doesn't mean it's not just as important for us to be able to get here reasonably after employment for those who are still working. So I'm going to make the hours for budget meetings be changed to start at 7 o'clock and adjourn at 9, and that at this time we add another budget meeting to the schedule for February the 20th to be reviewed if we need more closer to the end of discussions. Oh, it's just, I'm being told that doesn't work for people.
It is the executive committee consent.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be open. So. Yeah, so that's my motion, folks. I'll add another meeting and, I made a motion.
Second.
Okay. Motion, seconded. Any discussion on the motion?
Question?
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. Right, 10. Okay, the motion is passed unanimously. Okay, so seeing that it's past time of adjournment, I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn, and we'll be reconvening on February 6th at 7 o'clock. All those in favor?